Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to our council meeting of, Wednesday the 14th of June. It's a great day today, 14th of June, 2023. It's my birthday. No. I shouldn't have started that, shouldn't have said anything. Before we begin, if I could just ask the Deputy Mayor to open with karakia.
Tēnā koe, Mr Mayor, o te rā tēnā tātou. Tū tawa mai I runga, tū tawa mai I raro, tū tawa mai I roto, tū tawa mai I waho, kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Ka nui te mihi ki a koutou, kua haere ki te whenua o te mōtetea. Haere, haere, haere atu rā. Rātou te hunga mate ki a rātou, tātou te hunga ora e toitu ana I te mata o te whenua. Tēnā koutou. E te rangatira Grant, nau mai, hoki mai, neke mai, nuki mai ki tō kāinga o papai o ia, ko hoki ora mai koe. Harihuri tau hoki. In my karakia, I'd mentioned we're in the cusp of puanga, of course, with the Māori New Year. And it's a time to reflect, to honour those who have passed on, to set goals for the immediate and long-term future. And of course, that's very apt with our kaupapa today. I acknowledge the return of the Mayor from being away and also a happy birthday from all of us. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa.
Thank you. Right, we will go through, before we go to order of business, we'll just look at the housekeeping today. Obviously the meeting is being recorded and it's being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Health and safety procedures, which we're all well aware of, but for anybody that is entering the chamber for the first time, and unlike the event of an emergency, we will evacuate through the green signed doors to the assembly area, the clock tower and the square Te Maraehine. In terms of health and safety, the building is a non-smoking facility. Again, unlike the event of needing a defibrillator, that is located in the ground floor. Any incidences, please report that to our committee administration. Right. We will look to go to apologies, and we will receive apologies from Councillors Rowley Fitzgerald, he won't be here today, and Councillor Katie Zabellin for lateness. So I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there are no comments, we will vote, please. That is passed, 14 votes for, none against. Thank you. Notification of any additional items. I haven't received any. Declarations of interest. I have one from Councillor Hapeta.
So just with item 7, I've just got a couple of things in item 7 that I will declare an interest in, in item 7. Thank you. Great.
Thanks, Councillor. No others? Great, thank you. Public comment, I haven't been notified of any. Nothing from the floor, so we will now go to confirmation of minutes. And Council resolves that the minutes of the Council meeting of 31 May 2023, Part 1 Public, be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just a question around whether or not there was a budget attached to the community housing partnership. Did we not attach a budget at the end of the day? Okay, cool. Thank you. That's great. Plus my smart card isn't working.
Okay. All right. We'll try and get that fixed for you, Councillor. Okay, no other matters arising? Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I sent through a couple of administrative changes, just checking they've been incorporated. Thank you.
They've been done. Right. Okay. We will vote. It's passed, 14 votes for, none against. All right, we'll move through to number 7, which is around fees and charges and confirming them following public consultation. I'll invite Steve Patterson, our Finance Strategy Manager, to the table. Steve, floor is yours. Page 23 of your papers, councillors.
Good morning, Mr Mayor and councillors. Back in March, you approved a whole series of changes to fees and charges, and amongst them were these ones for planning and trade waste. They required a period of public consultation. That happened, both on its own, sort of in a process, but also in association with the budget documents. We didn't receive any comments back at all through the public consultation that was specific to this, but there were a few people who ticked boxes and said some things in their responses to the budget. But my impression of those was that, 15 out of the 17 who did make some sort of reference on the forms did support what was proposed, and the others didn't really know much about what the fees meant. So my recommendation is to you that that you adopt these as had been proposed previously, or as you had previously adopted, that you confirm that with a couple of minor changes to the schedules that are brought about by some changes that we're looking to make in terms of the way in which the timing of which I guess payments are going to be due, and it's partly brought about by introducing our new systems that are proposed from the 1st of July. So that's covered off in the report, and hopefully it's straightforward, but if I answer any questions.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Steve. Look, just a matter of curiosity, just on page 27, under the flat fees there, most of the flat fees there have all got an increase, but the town planning certificate alcohol is remaining the same. Can you just have a comment as to why that is so, please?
Might ask someone who's a bit more expert in that field to address that.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. When we looked at all those flat fees, we basically ran some numbers over the last couple of years on what the actual costs were, and I recall that one, the actual cost was basically the same, so we didn't need to change it.
So is that for people seeking new licences or updating the licences?
Yeah, it's kind of a formality thing that we do. It's not a big part of our work, and that $400 reflects about the cost, the time it takes, but we've ran it as a flat fee just to make it straightforward.
No, thank you, Jeff. Mr Mayor.
Just while we got you there, Jeff, keep you on the stand. Flat fees, small scale, along the same lines as Councillor Hancock. Most of them sort of either the same or gone up slightly, but there's two that stand out that have jumped either quite considerably, and there'll be a reason why: the small scale resource consents and the temporary or marginal breaches, which have jumped considerably. Is there reasons why?
Yeah, and it goes to the same point to Councillor Hancock. When we did a study of the actual costs of processing those consents, that's what they came in on. The reality is we get quite a few. A lot of our work is small scale. A lot of our work is marginal. But by the time you take into account the work that we have to do to process it, that's where it landed.
And is it consistent with what other councils are charging in this space? Do we ever do a sense check that we're not massively under or massively over than our neighbours and like-minded or sized councils around New Zealand?
Yeah, I had done a little bit of work on it. I can't categorically say, but broadly, when I looked at other council costs as part of this whole exercise, we're a little higher than average. That probably reflects some of the complexity coming out of our district plan, but broadly similar.
Okay, thank you. Being no other questions, we've got a couple of the resolutions there. Thank you, Jeff and Steve. So we've got fees and charges confirming the following after public consultation. When the council resolves that the council approves the fees and charges for planning and miscellaneous services as scheduled in attachments A and B, effective from 1 July 2023, and that the council approve the fees and charges for trade waste services as scheduled in attachment C, effective from 1 July 2023. I'm happy to move those. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any comments? I'll just make a comment that I think it's good that we are keeping up a bit with some of those fees and charges. I note that at times in the past we've held prices and effectively have to pass on a rather large increase at the 11th hour, which sometimes at least developers and people that in the business side of things with the district plan know what they're going to be charged. I just would urge the officers just to make sure that we are in keeping with other people around us, otherwise we do become a little bit uncompetitive as a city if we're massively different to others in a more expensive way. But happy to move these. And the trade waste, I mean, we've gone through quite a realignment there many years ago, and I think we're in the right space there, and I think probably others are catching up to us now. So happy to move those, and there being no other comments, we will vote, please. That's passed, 13 votes for and none against. Right, we will now come to the main part of business today, and that's around adopting the annual budget. That's item 8 on your agenda. Invite Cameron Mackay, CFO, and Steve Patterson back up. Page 37 of your papers, councillors.
Yes, Mr Mayor and councillors, on the 31st of May, as you're aware, you went through this process, considered the submissions, made a whole series of resolutions about things, and what we've done here is translate those into the draft, the document for your adoption. In terms of the outcome, thankfully, the following day we got the same outcome as we did at the meeting when we were giving you a provisional outcome in terms of the impact on rates. There is a second resolution which we normally have here, which is consistent with what we normally do, and which is to give some delegation to the Mayor and Chief Executive to make minor amendments. And I just point out that there are a couple of areas in particular that we will be seeking to get their approval to amend or to review once this is adopted, and that's first for the message of the Mayor and the Chief Executive, which you'll see is in draft. As the Mayor in particular hasn't had a chance to look at this yet, and the Chief Executive similarly. And in terms of the descriptions that we have of the programs as to whether they're brought forward, taken back, whatever, we've got some graphics that we normally have about that, and in the time frames that we had to get this document out, we didn't get those completed, so decided to leave those to do as part of the publication. And so, from my perspective, that's all that we need to outline in terms of the introduction, and we can take any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Anything to add, Cameron? No? Great. I'll open it up for questions. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Stephen Cameron. Just one question on page 55 of the, I believe this is the consultation document going out to, well, not consultation, but the public-facing document. We have in there a surplus of 8.6 billion, And I know you've explained it to the chamber how that works, but I feel like the average person reading through a document like this, seeing that we're putting their rates up 7.7% but making an $8.6 million surplus, may not understand how that works. Is there any consideration being given to explaining what happens to that surplus so people don't feel that we are overrating them?
Talk about it, or? I'll start, but Steve might want to jump in here. Good question. The reason why we show a surplus deficit is there are items that come through a revenue and expense statement that aren't all, I guess, pure operating expense related. So you have things like subsidies that come through that are capital in nature that fund aspects of the capital program. You also rate for things like loan repayment and the like. So that will always mean that will mean that if you're doing that correctly, you should actually see a surplus, because that then goes through to funding those activities that aren't on the revenue expense.
Appreciate that. And so would it be worth or appropriate to have an asterisk there and a short explanation so that anybody reading the document would understand that, or would that be unneeded?
Personally, I don't. I mean, we could go to lengths to explain this, but the number of people who pick up this document and read it's pretty slim, I would think, in terms of the effort we need to go to at the moment.
And Cameron and Steve, any cash surplus has traditionally gone back to pay back debt. Is that correct?
Yes.
It was a double yes, was it? Okay, thank you. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just looking at page 52, there's a paragraph in the middle there. This is under the financial overview and statements. In the bottom of the middle section there, it says consistent with financial strategy and its associated funding and financial policies, the annual budget achieves the following. And I'm just wondering if that's an oversight, because, I mean, further on in the document, it's made clear that we're outside of our policy for rates affordability benchmark. So I'm just wondering if that paragraph would need to be perhaps amended.
Perhaps we could add a comment that talks about that benchmark where there's a minor difference there, where we're outside. You were talking about the ones where the increase is marginally higher than the limit. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. It would not hurt to add a brief comment about that. I'll do that.
So that can fit under minor amendments?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Right, we've done the questions. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Steve. Right, we've got 4 resolutions. There's 2 on the screen. I'll go through them for the purposes of online. 2023-24 annual budget adoption. Council resolves 1, that Council adopt the annual budget plan for the 23-24 year as attached. 2, that Council delegate authority to the Mayor and Chief Executive to approve minor amendments to the final annual budget plan 23-24 for publication. Number 3, that Council resolves or confirms the adoption of the annual budget plan 23-24 as a significant decision within the parameters of the LGA 2002, and that Council is satisfied that all submissions have been considered and that they have been in compliance with the decision-making and consultation requirements of the Act. Number 4, that Council delegate authority to the Chief Executive to authorise payments to CCO organisations and other external organisations in accordance with the respective service level agreements. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any commentary. Councillor Johnson.
So I just want to make some general comments about the annual budget, and since we kind of finished in a hurry when we were doing the debate. We didn't get a chance for comment, so I've reserved my comments until now. I just want to say that generally I'm happy with the budget, and I just want to express thanks to staff for the very smooth process. We were well informed, questions were answered in a timely way, and I think that the whole process has gone very well this year, so I just think that that is worth noting. And also to colleagues for the very collaborative way in which this was approached. So we've been able to work between us to respond to submissions and to make changes that were generally agreed by most of us. And again, you know, that isn't the norm when you look across the country at all. So just thanks to colleagues for the collaborative approach. It's really appreciated, and it's been almost an enjoyable process this year, despite it being a difficult year. And so I think the reason that I'm happy overall is that given the challenges that we were faced with going into this, I think we've come out in a reasonable spot. We have made some significant deferrals. We have made some cuts to budgets, but at the same time, we've been able to respond to community submissions for increased levels of service in some areas. And in particular, I want to highlight the housing area. I think it's been very good that we've been able to respond in different ways to the housing need in the community. And in particular, I just want to highlight the extra money for the planning resource, which I think it's never very sexy to put money into planning resource, but that will be the most significant additional money that we've put into this budget, I think, in terms of the outcomes that we're likely to be able to get in terms of housing. So I think it's worth highlighting that, as well as the submissions from community about extra community facilities that were needed and extra resource for the CCOs. So those things are important, and when I look at other councils, they don't all consult on their annual budgets. Some councils, you know, if the annual budget is more or less the same as what was predicted in the 10-year plan, they don't go out for public consultation. But I think it's really good that we continue to, and I hope that that will continue, because it does surface needs in the community that perhaps we weren't aware of, and it gives an opportunity for the public to have their say, and I think that that's important. So thank you also to all the submitters who took time to come in, because I think it's a better budget for that community input, honestly. So just like the highlights for me are the, apart from the housing that I've already mentioned, is that we've been able to maintain community funding, and that's not a given going into any kind of budget scenario. And it's good to see that despite the pressures that are on all parts of council in terms of increased costs, that we've been able to maintain funding and service levels for community, which I think is really important. I also want to highlight the 8.16 million in tranche 1 money that is going to help us with housing outcomes as well, in particular in Summerhays, but also Huia Street. And that's money that we're able to direct to the most pressing needs in the community around housing. And I think that it gives us an opportunity to kickstart those projects and to get some progress going with them in a quick way that would have been difficult to achieve otherwise if we were having to add that cost onto all the other costs that we've put onto ratepayers. I also want to note that the rate increase, whilst nobody likes a rate increase, is lower than we signalled in the 10-year plan, and also that the predicted debt is lower than predicted in the 10-year plan as well. I have a couple of concerns. One is the risk that the budget will be insufficient to maintain service levels, and that was highlighted by staff throughout, and it's also mentioned in the budget itself, and that's something that we all need to keep an eye on throughout the year. And I would encourage staff, if the budget isn't sufficient to maintain service levels, that they flag that up to council proactively, rather than us just, I guess, sliding into lower service levels, which I wouldn't like to see. And the other slight concern I have is that there has been an increase in fixed costs. So the fixed costs apply to every rating property, that they're across the board. They don't take into account the value of the property. And those fixed costs have gone up, by my calculation, about 10.5%. So that is a concern, and that was one of the reasons why I was keen to see us do a reduction in the UAGC, because fixed costs are flat across the whole community, and they adversely affect those that have got lower value properties. But that is a small gripe, considering the whole picture, and so I'm just very happy with the budget, and hope that everyone will feel able to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
I thought there'd be more people in the queue.
There is.
I must have got in quick. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and whether or not I will vote in favour or against the budget. Ultimately, we need a budget, and at this stage of the process, no changes can be made. There's a number of reasons why I really don't want to support this. 7.7% is a lot higher than 6.4%. Our community are hurting badly in a cost of living crisis, with this chamber itself recognising that even $5 extra a week can put the squeeze on some of our most vulnerable families, particularly those on fixed incomes across our community. And so I make this speech recognising the hurt that this may and will cause to a number of people in our community. I also take issue with the fact that we added an incredible amount of money into the budget 2 weeks ago and didn't look at any way to offset it. And I feel like that was irresponsible in terms of us looking at what we could have done to bring this back into line with where we had consulted on. Would have we been chopping off fingers? We won't know, because we didn't look at it. However, ultimately I will be voting in favour of this budget, because I recognise how much worse this could have been, and the compromises that have been made by colleagues across the table to get us to where we are today. Without the $2.5 million reduction, both to our renewal spending and to our operational budgets, we could have been looking at around 1.5% higher than this, somewhere in the vicinity of 9.2%, which would have been an exceptionally hard pill for our community to swallow, and shows the situation that many other major cities are in across the country where they haven't looked into their budgets and tightened the belt like we have. And so I want to say thank you to my colleagues for the work that we've done. Although there are always going to be elements that individuals don't entirely agree with, I appreciate the compromise we've been able to make to get to where we are today, and I would hate to have seen us in a position going out here looking at a 9.2% increase to our community, as many other cities in this country are at. I want to thank our officers in the CE for the exceptional work they've done in reducing budgets or bringing budgets into line with what is realistic and deliverable. So thank you very much, in particular to Wade as a new CE this first time going through this process with us, and my first time going through this process. I've appreciated your counsel and advice, and to all of our officers for the work you've done. There have been some big wins in this budget as well, in particular the increased funding to Kākatangiata and industrial growth, and how that will look at securing our city for the next 30 years. I recognise a lot of money's been spent on this already, but at the end of the day, we have to do it. Land prices are only going up in this city, and this will be the single biggest mechanism we as a council can leverage to help reduce them and bring that cost in line over the next decades to come. There's also the Community Housing Partnership Program that we're looking at for the long-term plan, which I'm quite proud of and quite excited to see what result we get, because I would like to see us, as we've heard through our submissions, the many and varied ideas people in our community have for housing. I would like to see us as a council do what we can to support those and accelerate those visions that people have. And so I recognise that some people who support me to be at this table will be disappointed in me for voting for this budget, but I hope they appreciate for the few of them who may be listening here today, the compromises that have been made to get us to where we are, and I guess appreciate the vision that this could have been a lot worse had we not come to the compromises that we did. So thank you to my colleagues, thank you to our staff, and I will be supporting this.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. Like others, a few general comments. We've been through quite a good process to get to this stage. I think it's only fair that we do comment on it. First one to say, I was quite pleased with the forward from the Mayor and the Chief Executive, tempered by the comments perhaps from the staff, but I was quite pleased in that forward to see the community and council process really strongly foregrounded. And to be fair, I'd say even perhaps at the expense of some other things that may get written back into there, but I think recognizing that this is a community-driven, a political process that we actually go through to land at rates, and that it is a process of compromise at times, as Councillor Wood has pointed out. So I was really pleased to see that foregrounded. Quite often, certainly in my time on council, we've kind of saved most of the adjustment kind of appetite for the long-term plan, but I feel like in this case, the annual budget got a really good shake, both from staff and from us as elected members. I'd say almost you could say that we've been agile perhaps, or even nimble, which are words that you don't usually associate with budgets in local government. But this is, if you look line by line, what was in the long-term plan versus where we're actually going, there has been substantial change through the process this year, and I think a good demonstration of us listening to the community feedback and submissions. Very much appreciated those submissions and some of the themes coming through. It's heartened to see very strong support, particularly around active transport and cycling. Colleagues probably won't be too surprised to hear that, but I was actually quite surprised to that actually the most common theme to come through in commentary, and I was pleased that of those that chose to comment around improved provision for active transport, 80 to 90% were asking us to keep on with it or even do a bit more. So it's really good support in that space, and it's very helpful because we're actually moving into 12 months of very strong delivery in that space, Featherston Street Cycleway upgrades in Summerhill, Main Street West. So it's really great to have that clear support there from the community through this engagement process. So also really pleased to see the lift in non-rates revenue. I think this is touched on a bit through Councillor Johnson's comments as well. Some of that's kind of brought to us through Tranche 1. Some of it officers chased down through getting the Transport Choices investment. I'd really like to acknowledge the effort that officers have put in to chase down that additional non-rates revenue. That's actually moved the dial quite markedly when you look at our historic baseline versus what we've done here. And we often talk about, wouldn't it be nice if we could just get a bit more non-rates revenue? Well, this year, we've done it. So thank you to the officers that have put the work in to ensure that's happened well. I'd also say that it's further gratifying in lifting the non-rates revenue that it isn't just the taxpayer having to sub in for the ratepayer. We've also been able to tap into the emissions trading scheme investment. And that's investment that's generated by people that choose a high emissions lifestyle, and they, for those choices, get to pay a little bit extra. That creates revenue that can be, and has been now, cycled back into community level investment. So it's great to see that we are broadening where our resources are coming from, and we'll look forward to those being well used, we trust, in the year ahead. Turning briefly to that question of whether rates are too high or too low, and we've already heard a couple opinions expressed around there. I think the important thing for us to reflect on is that rates are simply the contribution that we make so that we can actually live in the sort of city that we want to live in, that our children want to live in, that actually sets us up for the future. And it does require investment. And so, like Councillor Johnson, I have some concerns when you actually look at the level of investment vis-a-vis how much costs are moving on us, that we may not have actually made sufficient allowance. But I do think in the balance of listening to submissions, listening to colleagues, we've landed in a reasonable space, but I would have had appetite, as you well know from the recent debate, for some extra small additions in that space. Just by way of final comment, then, I think, quite often we get to this point in the process and there's a bit of kind of job done commentary. It's actually job begun, because when we sign this off, that sets a whole lot in train in terms of planning, in terms of delivery, in terms of monitoring that delivery to make sure that the next 12 months, the opportunities that we create through this budget are actually well delivered to the community. So I would look forward to working with the Chief Executive and staff and colleagues in the next 12 months to ensure we get the best from this budget. I will be voting in support. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As others have already outlined, it has been a really good process to get to where we've got to, and just want to acknowledge the tremendous work of staff and my colleagues. We've had some really good, healthy debates about some of the things that are in and some of the things that are not in as a result, and I think we have listened well to our community. I think where we get to at this point is, yes, every item has been decided as a democratic process on a majority vote. But where we land here, we each have to consider, can we support this overall picture? I, as others have mentioned, have given this quite a bit of consideration. I did support the draft, which was quite a significant ask, in my view, for a 6.4% increase, particularly in the current economic environment. I won't be supporting where we've landed on, and my reasons for that are that we're asking our community for an additional $9 million. A lot of that is essential, some of that is not. And some of the people in our community who are going to have to stump up to pay that additional $9 million really are going to struggle with that. So I guess that I feel strongly that when we decide on policy limits, that we should stick to that. And I think that's the discipline we should apply to our own budgeting for council. I'm disappointed that we've gone over our policy limit in terms of the rates affordability benchmark. I think there are ways that we could have kept it under that. That was explored and that ultimately wasn't supported by the majority, but I'm not comfortable to support a rates increase in the current economic environment that exceeds our own policy limits. The other area that I'm not comfortable, which I have talked about before, is the size of a capital new program. I'm aware it's less than what was in our long-term plan, but it's still more than 60% more than the most that we've ever delivered in terms of a capital new program. So I think this is not the year to be trying to do 60% more than what we've ever done before. If the Mayor is wanting some clarification on that, a couple of years ago we did deliver 39.9 million capital new, and that was the highest in my understanding. So for those are the two main reasons. Whilst there's many things in this budget that I wholeheartedly support, I don't support the overall where we've landed in terms of what that requires, what we would be asking from our community, and I know many will struggle with that, so I'll have to vote against it today.
Councillor Hapeta.
Thank you. I'm going to be quite brief. All I wanted to do was say, yes, I'm fully supporting this. Two things. One is again, listening to Councillor Johnson, I really appreciate that the community have come in and told us what they would like us to do, and we are going to do the feasibilities for community groups in terms of Highbury, Pacifica and Awapuni Library, and we're going to deliver on that so that we can actually inform our long-term plan, which is what we need to do. We need to get the information so we can actually inform our own long-term plan and make our own decisions on the information that we need. And secondly, my second point is around delivering on capital new. We've got a new chief executive, and I think we need to give him the confidence that we've got in him to deliver that. So I think that, yes, he can do it. And we've got to give him that confidence that, yes, we think he can do it, and as councillors, we think he can do it. Thank you.
Councillor Bahan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. You're on notice, Wade, I think. I will be supporting the recommendations in front of us, and my reflection is really like others on the process that's got us to this place. And as Councillor Barrett said, I liked how that's captured in the forward from the Chief Executive and Mayor, that we went through a robust process of going through the budget line by line, giving it a good shake, in some quite uncomfortable discussions about how we might get to that. And I want to give my thanks to colleagues who pushed some of us in places where we weren't comfortable to go, but got us to a place where what we took out to the community was, I think, a really solid reflection of what we felt internally council could deliver, and gave us space to then hear back from our community as to where they thought we could go further, or we'd not got it quite right. I think maybe the shorthand reflection on the submissions that we received were that most people would like rates to be less, some people would like rates to be more, and everybody else wanted an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And that conversation with our community that turned into the things we added back in through the final debate, I think has had the benefit of putting us in a really good position going into the long-term plan. As Councillor Harper just said, pulling forward those feasibilities, finding ways to do that in a more streamlined way, a more cost-effective way, is really necessary work to advance some of those community aspirations that came through strongly in submissions. So I'm really pleased that we found space to do that. I think when we gather at this point to sign off an annual budget, it's always a bit of a kind of greatest hits. Everybody comes to this with their own philosophical positions, the positions that they were maybe elected to espouse, or drums we've been beating for a number of years for those of us who've been around the table that long. And I want to say thank you to colleagues for the collaborative way that we've gone about that in this first year of this triennium. It has been more of a pleasure than has sometimes been the case. So thank you for that. I think there will always be a philosophical difference around the table between elected members who feel like the best thing we can do for our community in a cost of living crisis, or even all of the time, is to keep rates as low as possible, and those around the table who feel like the best thing we can do for our community is provide community services and share the cost of that across the whole community. And that debate has been teased out in the various elements that came through the public submissions. But that's the heart of sometimes those debates, is everybody around this table wants the best for our community. I have absolutely no question about that. We just differ in how we think that can be achieved. And the robust debate that has brought us to this place, I think, reflects those diverse views. And what we're putting forward and signing off for our community today, I hope, is a balanced budget that reflects the concerns that came through in submissions, reflects the capability we have in our organisation to deliver, and reflects our will for the best for our community. And so I'll be supporting it.
Right, I'll comment for a couple of others. Look, just to echo some of I will be supporting this, obviously, as mover of it. Look, in the current circumstances, well, not everybody's done that in previous meetings. In the current circumstances, to adjust an annual plan, and those that have been around the table a little bit longer, we have never gone to this much, we've never drilled down as much as we have in this plan. And I think it's been really prudent. As Councillor Johnson said right at the start, it has been a collaborative approach, and I too want to acknowledge colleagues around the table, but also with the community. And I think business as usual has been really, really hard in the past 18 months, couple of years. And the cost of living, council's not immune to that either. So we've had to really look at the balance of what we do. And I realise some councillors just simply don't want to spend, and that's fine, that's their opinion. But you have to prioritise, and you've got to keep the council machine running. It's a race to the bottom by artificially setting rates really, really low. And we were forced to do that a few years ago, and we've had a couple of years of catch-up on that because of COVID. But I too have appreciated supporting our partners and CCOs. The level of service, which has been mentioned a couple of times, is a risk, but I think it's the world we live in at the moment, and we've just got to manage that risk along with the officers. Just want to comment on the financial policies, just reminding councillors, they were set in the LTP. Things have changed a little bit. And if we're 0.5 above that, I think that's pretty good in the current environment. So if the policy was set right here and now and we've exceeded it, perhaps some of the commentary would be valid. But we set it almost 3 years ago. So 3 years ago was a bit of a different world. Look, a couple of the things that councillors have spoken about, and I just want to make a couple of commentary as well. The extra planning resource for housing and for Tū Tanganui, the central hub, I think that got unanimous support. That was fantastic. We've got to keep doing that work. If we don't, again, the race to the bottom becomes quicker. Much needed increases for the Globe Theatre. I think, again, that might have been unanimous, and Te Manawa had a strong majority as well. Feasibility studies, as Councillor Hapeta spoke about, for library and community spaces, and having just come back from our sister city in Missoula, I'd have to say, Google the Missoula Public Library. Wow, they copied us. So we need, to invest in that space is really good. And Awapuni Highbury and our Pacifica community who have been, talking to us for a while now about wanting some extra investment. Funding support for key events, the Rural Games and the New Zealand Food Awards, and of course Councillor Finlay's favourite, the aged-friendly strategy and plan. That's finally on the books and again has been spoken about for some time. So I go back to investment as well, and there was an old TV ad, the BNZ TV ad, and it talked about good money and bad money and how you invest, and I think we've got it right with the good money. So I ask you to support this, these recommendations, please. And I'll go to Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Originally, when it was 6.4, I thought this is going to be great, and I was quite supportive of it. I thought the staff had done a brilliant job of giving us a budget of 6.4, considering that 6% of it was just there to maintain service. And that 6% increase we had to do just because the level of service has to stay the same. We as a council have added some bells and whistles and some good things and some things I disagree with. And 7.7% rate increase, $5 or $6 a week, as someone said. Now, I'll go back to my old argument. That's 2 or 3 loaves of bread. And, someone on a fixed income, that's breakfast. Really, I've heard it joked about, it's only a couple of loaves of bread. But councillors, just remember that is breakfast for some people. But I will support this because I've been through the debate and I've listened to the public and I've listened to our community and I've heard what they have wanted. And most of the increases that we're putting through this year above the 6.4 have come from our public. And so I will support it, but with regret that it's as high as it is.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also rise to support this annual budget. And before I make my comments, I just want to begin by thanking staff for their effort, hard work over the course of this annual budget process, the CENE staff, and also for their professionalism in providing some of those professional advice to elected members. And I also want to thank my colleagues for their constructive feedback on the whole thing and during the deliberation, and also for the professionalism. I think this has been much better than previous ones that I've been part of. And I also want to thank members of the public whose engagement with this annual budget process has resulted in some of the amendments that have been made in this budget. I think when I'm considering this budget, I'm quite comfortable where we've landed. And one of the reasons why I'm comfortable where we've landed is because when we see other councils around us or in the country, many of them have put their rates up in double digits to meet costs and growing demand. And I believe that we struck a good balance, I think, between affordability and the need to provide essential services and improvement across our city. And the 7.7 rates increase is actually a lot lower than the 9.5 initially suggested by staff in early March, and the 8.3% that was initially signaled or forecasted in the long-term plan. While I recognize that this rate increase will be a disappointment to some in our community, and also will put pressure on household income, I also think that it's also fair that we say that the council is not immune to the unpredictable effects of the global economic downturn caused by COVID-19 and also the war in Ukraine. We're also facing construction and supply chain issues, cost increases, skill shortages, and increase in interest on our debt as well. And therefore, I think we've done a good job in maintaining a good balance between investing to improve service delivery and community well-being, and also reducing costs in order to maintain or to minimize rates. When I see other councils, for example, around the country, we'll look at South District, South Waikato District, who have proposed 18%, 8.5% increase. We look at Wellington, almost 13%. We also look at Greater Wellington, suggesting 17 to 18% of rates increase, and all the other councils around the country who are putting their rates up in double digits. So I'm very much comfortable where we've landed with the 7.7%. And for anyone in the community actually questioning this, I think one answer, or one question, or one thing that I'll probably answer or just say to them is the fact that the council is not immune to economic downturn, and sometimes we have to respond to some of the cost increases that we are facing as well. So I'm very much in support of this. Thank you.
All right, no further commentary. Just as a writer reply, just finally, I too want to thank Wade and the officers. Thank you for your work and behind the scenes, and I know there was a few late nights to get things into the space they are now. Also want to acknowledge the public, because sometimes we forget that the community bother to submit, and when you look at the social media posts sometimes, you wonder, council never listens, blah, blah, blah. But actually, I think we have, in a really engaging way. So I think Councillor Finlay sort of acknowledged it started at 6.4, and the increases that are here aren't pet projects. They've been asked for and evidenced by our community. So I'm happy to lead this. So, councillors, I'll ask you if we can, now Councillor Naylor, you've popped in again. Do you want a second?
Just asking if the first recommendation could be taken separately.
Taken separately, I thought that might be the case. So we'll do number 1 first, and then we'll do 2, 3 and 4 together. Okay, so we have the first one there is around adopting the annual plan, annual budget plan for 23-24 is attached. All right, we will vote just on number 1, please. And that has passed 13 votes for and 1 against. We'll now go to number 2, 3 and 4 together, and I'll ask you to vote, please. Okay, so we're voting on 2, 3 and 4 together. And that has passed 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. Right, we'll move through to number 9 on our order papers around setting the rates for the 23-24 financial year, and I'll ask Steve, well, he's already there, back to the hot seat. Steve, page 175 of your papers, councillors.
Mayor and councillors, again, the setting of the rates is obviously the formal step that's required by the law to enable us to send the bills out in August, and it replicates what you've just adopted in the budget. And of course, in a legal sense, you can't set the rates until the budget has been adopted. So thankfully you've done that, and this report just now formalises that into the form that's required.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Steve. Just a question about the figures in table 2.4. So a number of those have gone up more than 7.7%. Can you explain why that is?
Yes. Excuse me. The figures are calculated to, I suppose, fund the cost that's shown for each of those particular activities. And as it happens, in terms of the changes that were made through the process, that meant that that there were varying impacts on particular activities. One of the things that happened between the time of the draft and the final was that staff looked hard at the way in which salaries were and costs and overheads were allocated to particular activities, and there was a significant movement between activities as a result of that. There was some done prior to the draft, but a further refinement done between the draft and the final, and that is aimed at more correctly showing where the resources are being allocated. And so that did have the impact of meaning that a couple of these charges, the water one in particular, is quite a bit higher than what originally we'd sought.
Okay, thank you. So when that happens, is there any thought given to reducing the UAGC to compensate for the increase in fixed charges?
I did give some, excuse me, I did give some thought to whether or not to propose that, and in the end, thought you'd had a very good discussion about the uniform charge and decided not to risk having that discussion again today.
So are we open to having that discussion today, or is it too late?
Personally, I think it's too late.
Okay, thank you.
All right. No further questions from councillors. We have the two resolutions, and this is around setting the rates for the 23-24 year. Council resolves that Council adopt the resolution to set the rates for 23-24 year, Appendix 1, and number 2, that the Council note that the setting of the rates is a significant decision within the parameters of the LGA 2002, and that it is satisfied there has been compliance with the decision-making and consultation requirements of the Act. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, as signalled through my questioning, I would like to make a comment about the significant increase in the fixed charges. I understand that the fixed charges are calculated on the actual cost of providing the service divided by the number of rating units that can be charged that particular service. But nevertheless, I think when there is a significant increase, as there has been in the water supply from 348 to 407, that there should be some corresponding reduction. Otherwise, if we increase the amount that is gathered through fixed charges, that falls on everybody equally. And as we know, not everybody is in the same position in terms of being able to pay. So I would have favoured a reduction in the uniform annual general charge to offset the big increase that we're having to put on the water supply. Certainly, we did propose a reduction in the UAGC during the annual budget, and that wasn't supported. So I don't intend to test my colleagues' patience by suggesting it again, but I do want to draw your attention to the consequence of maintaining the UAGC at its current level in the face of significant increases to fixed charges. And the consequence of that for the lower value properties is that more of their rates are paid on fixed term and less on the property value, which means that even less of their rates reflect the value of their property. And that is significant when we're talking about the cost of living crisis and the effect it has on vulnerable people. Here is one way where we would have had an opportunity to address some of those issues. So I'll just leave it at that for now. I think the timing of how these charges have come through is perhaps a little unfortunate. There may well have been more support for reduction in UAGC had this been known when we were having the debate. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. Wanting to comment here because this part of the revenue side of the budget is the part that I am by far the least comfortable with, and that is, in aggregate, all of the fixed charges that we levy in. Much like the previous speaker, I think this needs continued focus, especially as we move into a discussion soon, we hope, about the rating system as a whole. We live in a community that has many people living in poverty. It also has many people living in at least relative abundance. And I think in that case, we need to continue to ask whether there is a way to more fairly share the rates requirements. And when I look at these sort of numbers around fixed charges, and when I look at the sort of community feedback we're getting, I'd say we could do better, we can do better, we should do better. So when we look at section 2.4, we see that we're levying over $1,100 in fixed charges against every residential property. And that's before there is any consideration of the value of that property, any consideration of the potential for the property occupants in terms of their ability to pay. And I think that's far too high a cost, over $1,100, to be putting without nuance onto those people in our community who on average have the least ability to pay. To my view, that really skews the whole system. When you look at the graph in 2.10, it becomes quite obvious. A property that's at the lower end of that spectrum, we might call it the poverty end, has over 40% of their total rates as inescapable fixed charges. And what that means is that the people living in that property pay a far greater proportion of property value in total rates. By my calculation, it's 50% more per dollar of rated value in comparison to those families at the upper end of the spectrum, or perhaps we might call it the wealthy end. In my view, that is a very clear case of the old adage that it is expensive to be poor. We can do better, and we should do better, and I look forward to the upcoming rates review and continuing this discussion. We've built substantial appetite for reconsidering whether capital value or land value is the proper base, and in my view, that same rationale needs to be applied to the extent to which we force fixed charges across the entire community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I accept that we had a fairly good go at this at the end of last month, at our last meeting at least, and I just want to rise in the fact of a comfort level around what we discussed then and what we've proposed now, and challenge some of the terminology around poverty end of the home ownership. These are homeowners, actually, that are getting these bills. And anyone that, whether they are on a pension or otherwise, still owns a property. And I just can't, the word poverty end of calling homeowners poverty is just, it's kind of like a mind-bending concept in my mind. And so I just really want to challenge some of the terminology. It's not poverty, they are homeowners, but they may be living on more limited means. And so that aside, I am comfortable, because when you're saying that it skews an unfortunate consequence, we have been shown that it's actually skews the other way, an unfortunate consequence, that actually doesn't have any relativity of how people are paying their rates. We heard in the debate, and I mentioned it in the last time we were here, heard in the submissions, there's situations where homeowners with the same value property in different suburbs are paying thousands extra over a similar valued property in another suburb in the city. That is skewed. So what Councillor Johnston's been pursuing is a rate review, and I actually do think it's, because it's taken so long to get to this point, I actually do think it's probably timely that we do have a rate review. And we know that we've got plans to do that in the next period of time. And so I think that's the robust focus that we should have, rather than trying to skew corrections on something that's actually too hard to correct. And so 2 points there around the use of poverty, and then really knowing that we've got this in hand with the review in the next period. Thank you.
I'll make a comment too, and I wasn't going to poke the bear, having just come from a land of bears. But with some of the commentary I have to, and I think this is a debate about what is fair. And, we've seen a lot of central government commentary, especially from the Green Party, about this. And it's starting to enter this chamber here as well, which is a little bit disappointing, I'd have to say. Not everybody in this city is poor. And I'm sorry, but to put that label on things, I think is skewing the debate. And should a whole lot of people subsidise a whole lot of other people? And that is what this is all about. And I think we should be looking at some of the costs on 2.4, and should we be putting the real cost for water supply? Absolutely we should. Look, for those that have been around the table a little bit longer, we started the UAG at 500 plus. And we did the math and the debate around what that would look like at 200, at 100, at 50, and I think 0, I can't recall now, but there was a number of things there. So we've gone through that, but to actually come back and, I wasn't going to say anything, but I just think some of the commentary at times is a little bit, I'm just not in agreement with it at all. So I hope you do support this, because I think we've gone through the debate well and truly. Is this fair? I think this is as fair as we can be at the moment. I agree, we're going to do the rating review, and that's the time to have a look at everything, rather than trying to do this at the 11th hour. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also wasn't going to speak, but I just have to push against this language that's been used, because it is ridiculous. It was said last time, it's just right-wing talking points that they want to keep the UAGC up and, put extra costs on those in low incomes. Nonsense. I've spent this entire annual budget process pushing to keep costs down for those in low incomes. And if I was convinced that reducing the UAGC would do that, I would vote for it. But as we explained and discussed last time, low property land value does not necessarily equal low income. High property land value does not necessarily equal high income. And given a large amount of small sections in the city are those that have been subdivided and have brand new houses on them, I am not going to stand here and support giving people with brand new houses a lower rate, because it doesn't need to happen. The assumption or the language that is being used is about capital values. And yes, lower capital values or total property values quite possibly does represent lower incomes. But lower land values in the city is not a good metric for judging the income of the individual. And we've heard today, there's a number of older people on larger sections, former state homes and other properties of that nature, which have larger sections but low or fixed incomes. And so the suggestion that, oh, well, you've got a high land value, therefore you're wealthy, and you've got a low land value, therefore you're poor, it just doesn't stack up. It relies on the assumption that low land value equals poverty, and it's just simply not the case in the city. Look in a property press and see all of the brand new houses being sold on small subdivided sections. Colleagues, I just can't stand here and let that language stand. It is inflammatory and it is not true. Yes, there are some people in that situation, and for those, my heart does go out to them. I do sympathise. But I'm not convinced that the majority of people with low land values are in that situation. Frankly, if we look at those on the lowest income who are suffering the most, are generally renters who are generally on more middle-of-the-road sized properties where rate bills get passed down to them through the rent. And so really, the people that we're talking about here aren't those who own homes with a low land value. It's people renting in middle-sized section properties who are going to get hurt the most by this increase. So it frustrates me when that kind of language, inflammatory language is brought into the chamber when it's simply relying on assumptions that I don't think the majority of the chamber are convinced are true. So,
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I totally agree with some of the comments that have just been made, so I won't repeat those. But just do want to draw colleagues' attention to the points made in 2.5 on page 176. In terms of where our fixed charges sit, it represents 10.5% of our total rates revenue this year, which is exactly the same as the current year, and significantly less than it was in 2021 and for the previous 5 years, when it was 18, 19% and between 25 and 26%. So in actual fact, we have made significant change in the last 5 years in reducing those fixed charges. I think there are some valid points that those who are advocating to reduce them further are making in terms of wanting fairness, but I don't think now is the time to make those changes when our system relies on land value only. And Councillor Wood has very well articulated the concerning assumptions that are being made, which I do not think are correct, which assumes that people on lower land values have a lower level of ability to pay. That may be closer to the truth when we move to capital value, but it's certainly not true now. So when we're only months away from our overall rates review, this is not the time to tweak this further. So totally support the recommendation and happy to proceed, but very much looking forward to those debates when we review the rates to try and find a fairer system than what we currently have.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I am tremendously excited by the energy in the room towards a review of our rates system. And I think that is the debate that we just heard. I don't agree with some of the comments about the inflammatory language. I think the system we have is the system we have. That's the proxy we have for affordability, is our current rate system. And in that sense, then yes, our lower value properties are the proxy we have for ability to pay. We might wish that wasn't the case. We might be working towards it not being the case, but at the moment, it is the case. And it might not be true in 100% of cases. I don't think that's what Councillor Barrett was saying, but I think what he was saying was that's the best information we have at the moment to assess people's ability to pay. So I don't accept that it's certainly not the truth. I think there is an element of truth to it, and that's the process that we're in at the moment. So thank you, colleagues, for that lively and somewhat unexpected debate. And I look forward to the support for the review of our system towards a more progressive tax system for our ratepayers in the city, which truly does seek to reflect people's ability to pay. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I haven't actually seen a a motion put up to change the UAGC today. It's really just been a comment which has been made by a few councillors. UAGC is a possible lever to address inequity, and it's appropriate for those matters to actually be discussed openly in this chamber. So with that, I hope that's a little bit of sanity restored to the chamber to really stop talking about this being an emotive issue, because it's not. Thank you.
Spoken like a true policeman. Right down the middle. Okay, on that note, I think we'll just vote. Can I ask you to vote, please? And that has passed 13 votes for and 1 against. All right, on that note, I think we'll break and we'll be back in the chamber at 20 to 11. Thanks. Kia ora tātou, welcome back. And we'll now recommence our council meeting, and our next agenda item is number 10, which is around resolutions to authorise borrowing. And I invite back up to the table Steve Patterson, our Finance Strategy Manager. Steve.
Yeah, Mr Mayor and Councillors, this is another follow-on resolution or series of resolutions that just put in place the regime that enables us to manage the debt portfolio as is required under the Council's Treasury policy, and the $37 million worth of additional debt that's assumed in the budget is the sum that we're looking to have authority to manage on your behalf. And just as you're aware, the debt is not raised unless it's required, and so we make the decisions throughout the year as to how the cash flows are going and whether or not we need to raise it, just quite when we raise it. But this gives us the overall embracing authority to do that.
Okay, thank you. Open it up for any questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Steve. In terms of raising the debt, when we're in an environment of changing interest rates, is there any leeway in the policy for raising debt ahead of time as a kind of semi-insurance against interest rates going up?
In terms of the way in which we manage the policy, it's something that I think I've explained a number of times at quarterly report time. I interact with advisors every month, and we think about how best to raise and when. The question as to when is driven usually more about being able to ensure that we have access to the funds, and it's one of the things that our credit rating agency takes particular interest in, and their liquid position. And so it is the case that we will borrow up to 12 months in advance sometimes to fund maturing debt. But of course we also were looking at the interest rates prevailing at the time and making decisions as to whether to borrow fixed or to borrow floating, and so those calls are made each time. And just recently, a week or two back, raised some money when it looked like the market was heading upward a bit in an effort to get what we thought was the best arrangement for us at the time. So yes, it's a day-to-day thing that we're looking at.
So there is enough leeway in the policy to allow you to
yes.
vary the timing to try and
Yes.
get the best deal?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions from me. Page 191.2.9, where it talks about the interest that is required for the new, additional debt. The 0.76 is obviously about, 50% of the full 1.5 million on that new debt, which I am aware that 50% is what we used to budget for, but last year it was reduced to a third for some reason. Have we, can I understand what the thinking is there? Is that?
Yes, you did, right. Our policy approach has been to assume that we would incur half a year's worth of interest over the full debt. Last year, as part of the process of finalising the budget, we decided to stretch that a little bit and to make a provision for only a third. It was one of the things that we did in effort to try and keep the budget increase, the budgeted rates increased to the level that was required. But our recommendation for this year, well, our budget assumes this year that we'll have the half year, and part of the rationale for that was that the interest rate itself at 4.2% is one that we haven't. It's a budgetary assumption, and interest rates are still a bit higher than that at the moment.
Okay. Yep, no, that makes sense. And just the other question was, in 2.3 on page 190, talks about the additional debt of 36.2 million being raised during the year, but the request is for 37 million. I'm just wondering why the additional...
Well, I just round it to the nearest million,
okay.
or round it up to the nearest million was just what I've done here. Obviously, we're not raising the debt unless it's required, and also there is, well, who knows exactly yet, sometimes there's some minor adjustment or slightly bigger adjustment to the sums that the council approves through the year over and above the budget for whatever, and this just gives a little bit of scope to cope with that.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Steve. That's the questions done. So, councillors, resolution on our screens, the three of them, is around authorising borrowing. Council resolves that Council authorise the Chief Executive to borrow in accordance with delegated authority up to 37 million, the borrowing of additional term debt by way of bank loan or loans or credit facilities or other facilities or the issue of stock for the borrowing secured by debenture trust deed. Number two, that Council note the purpose of the borrowing is in carrying out or continuing the program of identified work in the annual planned budget 23-24 year. Number three, that the Council note that any sums raised and subsequently on lent to the Palmerston North Airport Limited pursuant to the loan agreement between the Council and the company will be in addition to the sums to be raised for Council's own funding purposes as authorised above. I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Oh, is there? 8. Okay, so we'll go through the rest of them. Sorry, I was hoping there was 3. So 4, that Council note that the security of borrowing may be charge over rates under the debenture trust deed if the Chief Executive considers appropriate. 5, that Council note the benefits of the borrowing are that it will enable the Council to carry out the programs identified in the annual budget while spreading the costs of those programs over the time to recognise future benefits. The risk is that interest rates may vary in the future, resulting in higher debt servicing costs to Council. 6, the Council approved that having regard to Council's financial strategy, it is prudent and reasonable to enter into the proposed borrowing for the reasons set out in this report. Number 7, that Council note that the raising of the borrowing will comply with the Council's liability management policy. And number 8, and finally, that Council note that the decision to borrow up to 37 million is a significant decision within the parameters of the LGA 2002, and it is satisfied that there has been compliance with the decision-making and consultation requirements of the Act. I'm happy to move that now, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Okay, there's quite a lot there to unpack, but it's not unusual for what we do at this time of the year, and it's part of the process to allow debt funding to occur to carry out programs that are somewhat longer in term and in some cases intergenerational. So it's part of our process. I'm not going to speak any more on it. There's no other comments. I suggest we vote. That's passed, 14 votes for and none against. Right, we look to the Council work schedule, and that's on pages 193 to 195. And there's only a couple there that I'll just make a brief comment on. Number 10 and number 6. We're just a little bit unsure. Number 6 is around just getting the panel together so they can make some recommendations back to Council on those trustee appointments to CCOs. And number 10 is around our Nature Calls project, and of course we're just waiting the pending relodgement or outcomes of the consent. So we can't give that an absolute timeline, but it will come to us in the very near future. So is there any other commentary there from them? No? All right, so we've got a Council work schedule. Anything from you, Wade? On no. Okay, so we've got a council work schedule. We resolved to receive it dated 14th of June 2023. I'm happy to move it. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there's no commentary, we will vote, please. And it has passed, 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. Is it? So that's not part of, it's not separate, that's all part of the work schedule. Yeah. Okay, we now look to go to part 2. It's around exclusion of the public, and it's for, as reasons on the agenda papers shown on the screen, it's around third-party commercial and the privacy aspects of the district plan. And I'm happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. If there's no commentary, we will vote. And that has passed, 14 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, just give everybody